leader of Ontario's NDP has been crisscrossing the province, meeting voters and volunteers after her party's disappointing popular vote showing in the most recent election. It comes as the NDP prepares for its convention next week in Niagara Falls, which will include a mandatory vote on whether to have a leadership review. Joining me now is Ontario NDP leader Marit Stiles. It's great to welcome you back to the show. Thanks so much for being in studio.
Yep, very happy to be here in the new studio. It's very exciting.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
What have you heard from voters on this tour so far, and what lessons from the campaign are you going to be taking with you into next week's convention?
Well, you know, Doug Ford decided to take a 5-month break with the legislature, and I thought to myself, people can't take a 5-month break. I will not take a 5-month break. So I've been out there, as you said, all across the province, listening to where people are at. And no question, many Ontarians are very, very worried about the future of our economy, their jobs, whether they're going to have a job. And young people, as we know, high unemployment rates, very concerned. And then, you know, depending on the region you're in, many other issues. But I think that's the overwhelming one. And for me, you know, that is the lesson, right? Is go to where people are at. You don't drive your campaign by polling numbers. You got to get to where people are at in their workplaces, in their communities, on the front line, and listen to what their priorities are, and then address those. And you know, I think I've certainly learned a lot this summer, but also I think I've been able to deliver a message to people that you are worth fighting for, and I think that's a message that a lot of Ontarians need to hear right now.
Based on what you've heard from voters, though, do you think the NDP right now in Canada has an identity crisis? And I ask that against the backdrop of some union leaders, as well as some staunch NDP supporters across this country, embracing the other two parties in the most recent elections. Like, do you think the NDP needs to move away from those traditional social issues and wasn't quick enough to adapt to these fraught times?
You know, I think that, well, first of all, I mean, it was a very difficult federal election in particular. I mean, provincially, we held on to official opposition status. We have a very strong team of MPPs who are all across this province. So I feel like we're in a really great position here to hold Doug Ford to account and to drive a more progressive agenda for the province. But look, absolutely, you know, the federal NDP is going through a leadership race. That's a great opportunity for Canadians to think about, you know, what are we missing here? What do we need to see from our political parties, and particularly on the left and progressive parties? But my concern right now is what are people looking for, and how do we make sure that they get a government that is actually focused on fighting for them? And I don't see this right now. You know, 800,000 Ontarians right now are unemployed. 800,000. In Windsor, which used to be like driver of our economy, 11% unemployment, the highest unemployment rate in the country. And I don't see Doug Ford focused on saving the jobs that we have, the good jobs. I don't see him fighting for Ontarians, and I don't see a plan in place. And, you know, all I see him doing is pointing fingers, for example, at like young people. You know, you're not trying hard enough. You're not looking hard enough. I think Ontarians, I think young Ontarians, I think all Ontarians deserve better than that.
And I know you've just said earlier that you don't put too much stock into public polling, but I wonder then how you explain the latest public polling since the election.
You know, I think that people, look, I think polling is always like a snapshot in time. And certainly right now.
But your party continues to lag behind the share of its vote since the most recent election.
Well, and as you know, too, I mean, some of this is also about we have to be smart about how we win and fight for elections, and we did that, and we remained official opposition. But I 100%, to me, it's really more about listening to the people where they're at, and I do think the polls don't capture a lot of that. You know, I think there are issues that are bubbling under the surface that for people out there are really, really important priorities, and I'm not going to run my life or my party based on some public polling, because that doesn't tell you what people really need. And so I truly believe that the future of this province is going to be based on, you know, the future of our young people. Right now, we have a devastating college strike. We have a government that wants to blame, you know, trustees or whatever for the problems that they created in our schools. I want to fix our school crisis. I want to build a stronger healthcare system. And more importantly than ever, I really think Ontario needs a plan for how we are going to create the jobs of the future, or else we don't have a future in this province. And we are seeing people leaving the province. So the issues we're dealing with now are super important, but you got to get out there and listen to real people.
So why
and
do
I
you
think it shows
that,
you why the government's so out of touch right now.
Why do you think then that message has fallen short? Do you think it's the dramatic loss of the national NDP? Like, is that dragging your party down?
You know, I just think that generally speaking, like the people that I talk to out there across the province aren't paying attention to these kinds of issues or this politics right now. What they're focused on is these big issues of like the question of the sovereignty of our country and whether they can feed their kids during the day. And so you see incumbent parties, governments all across the country are actually very high in the polls right now, if you care about those things. And in fact, Doug Ford's popularity as premier is the second lowest of any premier in the country. So I think that, again, those things, do they mean anything right now? I don't know. We are probably at least 3 years out from a next election. My role as leader of the official opposition is to make sure that this government doesn't drive us into the dirt, into the ground, is to make sure that we push the government to put people at the heart of all of their decisions, especially regular people. And my focus then as well is to build the plan that's going to see us hopefully win and defeat the government in the next election.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much, NDP Leader Marit Stiles. Great to have you in studio.